Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Saturday. So yesterday, met with one of my students and we were talking about Handy's culture and also critical path analysis. We focused a lot on reliability of data, validity of data as part of this, because it's obviously one of those quantitative skills, tools even. So if you think about it, if it's a mathematical based model, we need to question the numbers. So we need to look in the case study, look for the qualitative evidence about where we might question it, and that will help us with essays. So we're going to work through a 4 marker and a 12 marker from past papers, the 12 markers from 2021. So there are only examiner comments in the Chief Examiner's report. There aren't actually any reasonable examples. So, but we'll go through that as well. And I'm not going to apologise in advance for repeating data reliability about, 200 times during this video. And hopefully I can keep it under 25 minutes, even though it's a big task and there's 2 exam questions to go through. So here are the exam questions, and we can see we've got a 4 marker, we've got a 12 marker. This one looks quite scary because there's so many words, but actually in between there is a partially completed CPA diagram. So I think this highlights the importance of making sure that you read the entire case study, including the text that comes before and after, possibly a graphical data extract like we see here. So you can see it tells you exactly what you need to do. We need to make sure that we have that EST, our LFT, and, what a lovely word, identify the critical path. And as we know, a critical path is the longest path. Okay, and we can talk about that a bit more in depth when we get to the essays. The essay, if we were practicing some of our planning, clearly we need to identify the hook first of all. Well, we've got the normal hook of likely value, and there are lots of different versions of this. Our knowledge is clearly demonstrating an understanding of CPA, and normally with these questions, it's the likely value of something to something. So we know that it's of CPA, and the 2 is effective management of the installation of a new IT system. So unfortunately, it is the rest of the question. So what we've got there, obviously not meant to cross it out, is the remainder of the hook. Okay, so we know what it is. We want to know what effective, that word to me is, I want to know what effective is. Well, with a CPA question, effective might be coming in on time. Yeah. I would be looking to use other language other than EST, LFT. I would be integrating float times. Now, for this type of question, there will always be a quantitative element that is required. So you can't just waffle your way through this and describe it. My advice is do some maths, okay? You've got to at least interpret the data, and I'll go through an example. And as always, it won't be a perfect essay because I'm not actually sure what one of those looks like, but it will be level 4, and you can decide in the comments where you think you would place it, using the marking grid standards to justify your point, please. So everything starts with a good definition. This is a bit wordy, yeah, but I want something in my definition that comes up with longest path and clearly without delaying the project. Now this bit here, without delaying the project, suddenly prompts me to look for qualitative evidence in the case study if this was an essay question, looking for possible things that might delay the project. I'm also going to get excited about the word new a little bit later, so pay attention to the word new. I might even say it three times in one paragraph. It's an exciting word when we're talking about questioning the reliability of data. Here is the feedback from the Chief Examiner for this question from 2021. Basically, the majority of people waffled their way through, okay? So, you know, we clearly will want balance. Well, we know that's basic essay technique, but use the numbers, use the data, question the reliability of that data. The examiners, and I might repeat this later, the examiners are lovely people. Yep, they're lovely. They want you to get the best exam results you possibly can. It takes them at least a year to proofread these things, to strip all the rubbish out, Make sure there's nothing confusing in the case studies, and 99.9% recurring, they get it right. Okay? So if it's in the case study, it is there for a reason. So for example, this bit up here in the 4 marker, it came before the data extract. I can nearly guarantee you that there's going to be some people that don't bother reading it. When we look at the 12 marker, keep that in mind as well. But we will come up with that in a second. So let's go through the advantages and disadvantages. We need to know this for every definition in the A level, of course. This is bread and butter revision. So we'll quickly whiz through this. You should know this. Maybe have your notes next to you. You can update it, or maybe I've missed something. Maybe. So this is sort of a rework of the definition. So you should be able to regurgitate that quite easily. Yes, it helps us with our scheduling. So optimization is actually, if we talk about it, if we discuss it with our teams, if we stick it in a plan and we track our progress through the CPA, then maybe we can improve things. If this is a one-off project, so the 12 markers talking about installing a new IT system, for example, maybe I don't do that again for another 10 years. But if this is a brand new project that's going to repeat itself, so innocent smoothies in the background there, I'm thinking that they might have a CPA diagram for their orange juice. Oranges might be grown in Portugal. Portugal then have time to get the oranges to the factory. This is a perishable good. If that's delayed, it could actually damage the quality of the oranges. It then needs to be processed. It needs to do whatever they do with it to make us think that it's healthy. They need to get it in the packaging. They need to then, if they've got the contract, which you'd hopefully think they would have it before they made the orange juice, they would then need to get it to their supply chain. The supply chain might then need to get it to Tesco's. Tesco's might need to get it into a fridge quite quickly. Then they will need to sell it within a certain amount of time, and there you go. There might be fluctuations in demand. I'm thinking in the summer you might sell more orange juice. In flu season, because of the vitamin C content, we might sell more orange juice. Okay, so those sorts of things are quite important. Then imagine if there's a massive drought in Portugal, 40-degree heat, oranges can't grow, not enough water. Maybe we then have to go further afield. Yeah? Maybe it takes longer to get the oranges. Think about that. So anything to do with these activities and the possible dependencies between them, well, if I can't get oranges, I can't make orange juice. That seems a bit obvious. We have to understand those. Resource allocation, people are resources. Also, stakeholders are resources. So if you see anything to do with internal versus external stakeholders, internal being staff, resources, other departments that might need to work together, and if they haven't worked on a project before, the alarm bells should be going to do with reliability. Also, if it's external, have they got a track record of working with them? Is this a new provider? Do they sound like they're absolutely brilliant, but unfortunately when they actually start doing the job they're pretty terrible? What are you going to do about it mid-project, for example? All of those sorts of things you should look out for in case studies, because remember, if it's there, it is there for a reason. Here we've got over-allocation and underutilization. So let's deal with the first. If I give my staff too much work to do, the CPA diagram is really focused on time, not quality, and I'll list this again in the disadvantages for you. Now, if my staff only focused on time, maybe they rush making the orange juice. Maybe it's not to the same recipe. Maybe it doesn't taste the same. Maybe I then get bad reputation. Tesco stop buying innocent smoothies. Remember, staff, if they're only managed on time, will possibly take shortcuts. Not definitely, they might. Look into a bit of history. Post-World War II Russia, very much national pride, mass manufacturing, mainly focused on volume targets, nothing really much to do with quality. Okay, that's my interpretation of the history anyway. Underutilization could actually increase your cost of production compared to being correctly utilized. Staff, we could have staff waiting around for that float time. If you identify float time, is that for quality checking? Is that staff being allocated to another part in the process? Have we got multi-skilled staff? Or is this just an IT professional that we're getting in? What happens if there's a delay and I've contracted with an external provider to come in and do my IT? They're still going to bill you. They're expecting to start on a certain day. It's not their fault you're late. This then not only delays the contract, could also increase your costs. Look at HS2. Yeah? I'm sure they had a CPA diagram. How effective it was is up to you. So yes, we're going to monitor. We understand these critical points. We're looking for those dependencies. This is some of the language you should probably get into your essays. And without that being fulfilled properly, we can't move on. And this will just delay everything else. The car industry is a great example of this. Car manufacturing, JLR, a couple of years ago, there was a huge global shortage in semiconductor chips. All cars have got computer chips in them. There's a shortage because of the growth in AI. There's a shortage because of, earthquakes. And you've got huge demand in certain markets, and a lot of them are made in the Far East. JLR couldn't get enough of these chips, so they prioritised putting these chips into high profit margin cars, and they temporarily paused making the other ones. Okay, this is how sometimes a CPA diagram might not be the most flexible of tools, because it doesn't actually analyse those external pestle factors. Look out for them in the case study. If they're there for a reason. So yes, it can help with decision making, and obviously we've got those plans, and we can adjust our resources if we run out of semiconductors. And you've done a unit on contingency planning, and if you don't know what contingency planning is, go away and revise it before next Tuesday. Okay? So, the bigger the project, the more complex the CPA. We need to make sure that all of those dependencies, those activities, are in the CPA, so we can keep a track on them. We can think about what we need to do. Do we need to adjust the plan, for example? Now, the more complex it is, the harder it is to plan. Makes sense. Then think about all those internal stakeholders. The more departments you involved, maybe the more communication. You've done organisational structure. You understand the merits of tall versus flat. Then let's make it a bit more complicated. We outsource some of our IT to professional companies. Well, this just adds a whole dimension. Yes, they might be brilliant at software engineering, and maybe we don't have the staff, but it's another stakeholder to put into that CPA. And one of the good things about a 12 marker is you can sort of comment as well on the stuff that's not in the case study. So if it doesn't say how they're going to work, well, maybe that's me questioning the reliability. And there's a big tip in the case study, which I've already alluded to, the word new. A new operations director, a new computer system. There's so many news in the case study. I'm hoping that lots of people that did that paper in 2021 read the case study. So, assuming that these are fixed estimates, well, that's what the whole thing's about, so you can actually track if you're on time. However, if they are inaccurate, now we can't just say, however, if they're inaccurate, however, if they're a little bit unreliable. What we need to do is we need to look for those factors to question the reliability of data. I'm glad you shouted it at the screen, because we're looking for those qualitative factors to question the reliability of that quant. Okay? Don't just take the numbers at face value, except for when you're doing those cheeky 4-mark calculate questions, because all you need to do is write numbers and a couple of slashes, which I'll go through in a bit. So, it is possibly limited flexibility unless you build the flexibility in. But if you've got lots of flexibility in there, well, maybe you've got a lot of that float time, and we've got some of those underutilized people that we mentioned over here. So over here, we've got resource allocation, which prevents it. Over here, well, if you build too much flexibility, and you might have underutilized staff. If you don't build in flexibility, because we're focused on achieving the time of the entire project, maybe we ask staff to work harder and longer, and maybe they rush stuff. Who knows? Okay, so we need to think about that. And have we got adaptability and flexibility built into the model? Yes, time over quality, done that one to death. And also ignores those resource constraints. If you think about your supply chain, the more complex the supply chain, the more things that could possibly go wrong. Who would have thought that the little canal that brings us cheap clothing from the other side of the planet would have Houthi rebels using drones to bomb and trying to take over, not the drones, obviously the rebels, trying to take over some of our cargo ships. So therefore, fashion have started using cargo planes again, not going through the Suez Canal. So you have to think about how these things might impact it. My drought in Portugal hopefully doesn't happen, but maybe we don't buy our oranges from there. How flexible is your model? Remember, this will probably be based on your previous understanding and knowledge, historic data. And if the historic data is not a reflection of the current situation, all those internal factors and external factors, if only there was a model that would actually assess those said SWOT, then limited value. So I may have mentioned data reliability a couple of times so far, so let's do it again. So we need to question the reliability or validity of data. In 20 markers, it's specifically mentioned. This is a data question as well as an essay question when we look at the 12 marker. You've got to question the numbers, okay? But in context. Very technically sounding essays that don't use the case study will end up with 4 marks out of 12. You don't want that to be you when you open your results on results day. So use the case study. Is it accurate? Now here, it's based on historical data. And as I've said before, this could change. It might not be reliable. If you see the word dynamic in a case study, well, it's rapidly changing. Yeah, so maybe your historic data isn't quite what it should be. Is it based on expert judgment? I've mentioned the word new a couple of times so far as well. In the case study, it says new operations director or manager. He might be the best operations manager on planet Earth, but maybe he's not worked with the team before. Maybe it's new sector. Maybe he's not worked with the new computer company that they're working with as well. There's a lot of news there. I would never accuse someone of blagging their answer, especially A-level students, because it would never happen. However, we're not going to put, maybe they've just made it up. We would question the reliability of them being new based on the new system. There's lots of news there, okay? Think about that and how it might have an impact on this using the numbers or the information from the CPA diagram or the labels. Those assumptions and dependencies, again, we can think, are they all there? So if we had a mean examiner, which would never happen, maybe one data extract is your CPA diagram and another one is talking about those critical points in getting this project to market. If one of those points in that case study are not actually mentioned in the CPA diagram, that would be a mean question. But what an opportunity for you to possibly move towards the top of level 4 by identifying that from the case study. Okay, they would make it blindingly obvious if they were going to do that, by the way, but they would have done that because sometimes they write something called a differentiator question, which is differentiating the A and the A-star students from the C, D and E students. Okay, someone has to get a range of marks. Okay, well, students have to get a range of marks. So projects change during the time. So Tesco's phone up Innocent Smoothies and say, I know I asked for 100 of those, and now I want 150. And by the way, I want them on the same day. Okay, seasonality could be the reason for that. Changes in markets, it could be any of those MOPS factors. But I'm thinking about seasonal demand industries. It might be that our paper 3 manufacturers for ASOS buy in a certain amount of clothes, and before they actually get shipped, ASOS contact their manufacturers in, I don't know, sunny Leicester and say, actually, we need another 60% because we've already got pre-orders for all of these things. It's more popular than we thought. Is that flexibility built into your model? Have you got the resources? Can you suddenly upscale? Or will you have the problem that Marks and Spencer had a few years ago because they underestimated demand? They made all of the clothes for this. It was a summer special range in China. They ran out within about 2 weeks. They couldn't get the Chinese manufacturer to make them quick enough. Lots of unhappy customers that may have gone to Next. Maybe they never came back. Now Marks and Spencer's have their dynamic ranges made in Spain because it's closer. There's more flexibility in the supply chain. And they're more steady, eddy, easy to predict sales, I don't know, white t-shirts or something, made in the cheapest possible place they can find. Probably Bangladesh or parts of Vietnam. Okay? Think about that in context with what you read. Data collection methods, well, how robust is it? This is unit 1.1.2 from theme 1. You should know about this. And just because theme 1 is not in next week's paper doesn't mean you can't bring in theme 1 and 4 theories, as long as you obviously use them to complement your answers. I wouldn't recommend that at all for 4s and 10s in paper 2, but for your 12 and 20s, those extended arguments, I'm sure you'll be able to do a bit of that. I know a couple of my students brought in a little bit of ANSOF to help them with a 20-mark justification in paper 1, for example. And from what they told me, it was a very, very good use of ANSOF discussing risks. Resource availability, I've talked about the oranges, so we won't go on about that. External factors, excuse me, you can read the examples, but I'll talk about regulatory changes. If my historical data is based on before the regulatory changes, then you need to think if the data is then slightly compromised. Does the regulation bring in extra paperwork? Does that delay? Does that cost extra money? Does that actually change the entire manufacturing process of innocent smoothies? I don't know, but if it's in the case study, it is there for a reason. Yeah, so if it says what recent changes in UK legislation to do with orange juice, and you've got historic data that actually helps you put your CPA together, did they take it into account? And if you don't know, nice counter argument for you to write in context, hey? Stakeholder input, internal, external stakeholders. This could be our politicians in law. Think of those pestle factors. This could be competitors, it could be our suppliers, it could be our staff, okay, it could be trade unions, could be absolutely anything. Okay, you need to think about how all of these different groups working together might impact the reliability of that data. Okay, fantastic. So here is eventually a 4-marker for you, okay? Now this type of 4-marker, go careful. Top tips from the theme 1 video I did for you was make sure you read the case study. If there's text above or below, asterisks always give stuff away normally. So Innocent Drinks have constructed their network diagram and they plan to launch a new line of smoothies. Each number represents how many days each activity estimated to take. Easy, okay? So using the data, which is there, and actually I've not shown you any other data extracts because there's enough there already. This is like a data extract in its own. Calculate the earliest start time and the latest finish time for each activity. Watch out for that word, hey? And identify the critical path. Now, the critical path is the longest path, okay? Now, we're always going to go 0, 0, okay? Ta-da! Okay? Happy days. We're then going to be thinking about the biggest number. Now, last time I checked, 3 was bigger than 2. Okay, so that point is paused because B is going to have to wait for A. 3, 3. We're then thinking about, well, what's the bigger one there? Well, clearly we've got 8. So last time I checked, that would be 11. Okay. Then we are going to think of bigger number, 3 or 2. Yeah, okay. And then we are going to think about that, which is plussing 4 and 14 together. So we have got 18. Ta-da! Happy days. And identify the critical path. Now, in a minute, I'm going to write some stuff up on the screen or pre-done text. I'd never write anything more. But what I would do is I would just use the symbols that your teachers teach you to identify the critical path. That will get you 4 marks for that question. You do not need to write, the text I'll put down the bottom of the screen. You do not need to write this. So I'll put a cross next to that, not a tick. That's meant to be a cross. And you do not need to mention the total project duration is 18 days, even though it's quite useful if you're doing that in an essay, of course. I can't see even the meanest of examiners asking you to do a CPA diagram and then doing a 12 marker. But you need to be ready for these things. Okay, so it's really important that you are ready. Okay, 4 marks. I'm going to put 4 out of 4 up there. So I'm going to give it a tick and maybe even a smiley face. Draw some ears. There we go, we'll move on. So this is the 12 marker. And this is a great example of make sure you read the text before you read the question. We've got loads of stuff here. There's another data extract that went along with this, which they call data extract A, and in there they talk about washing machines and everything else, and they do mention that their products come from China. Now I've actually used that to talk about proximity of the supply chain for my computers for this question. It is a bit of an assertion, and I'm expecting my students to shout at me assertion. But it says China in there. I think I'm going to get away with it, to be honest with you. We'll see what you think. You can drop some comments, my students, please. Drop some comments in and tell me what you think and did it impact my overall mark. So let's look through this first paragraph first. So BioDirect's new operational director is in charge of installing new IT system for the warehouses. This project must be completed within 45 weeks. Okay, key information, which isn't available down here. The operations director has produced the following network diagram. Hold the phone. This is where we get all excited about CPA diagrams. We have got, sorry to repeat, but your teachers tend to repeat at least 3 times. The new operations director is in charge of installing the new IT system, and the operations director has produced the diagram below. Doesn't say he's worked with any of his mates. Doesn't say he's worked with any of his really experienced team that might have been at Direct before. It sounds that he might have put this together in isolation. Now I'm thinking if he's an ops director, he's got some experience. I'm not going to say he's incompetent or he's blagged the diagram or asked AI to do it for him. But what I am going to say is he's new, it's a new project and he's done it and there's no indication that other people have helped him. Okay, so we are already questioning the reliability of this data and we haven't even looked at the data yet. We've then got a number of different parts of this CPA. We can think about that, and I'm instantly drawn to float times. Okay, so I'm looking for something else. I want a calculation, and there's some obvious calculations here. This is 41 weeks, and that's 45. Even as a Dalmatian, I can work out that that's 4. And then I'm thinking that this might be an important factor that I'm going to talk about as well. Okay? Then I'm looking for other things because they've done the A through to G. And what is stakeholders? What could go wrong? Yeah? I'm going to order the stuff and I'm going to implement the stuff. Let's hope the orders turn up on time. That's where I've dropped in the China bit, by the way. I'm going to identify the problem to be solved by the IT systems. Okay, that's no problem at all. Then I'm going to recruit. Well, let's hope they can find people in that very labour shortage ICT industry at the moment. Okay, we're then going to train up those staff, presuming they need training. We're then going to discuss the IT solution. Okay, even though they've already identified the problem. I'm not sure who's doing that. Maybe it's the ops director who's going to identify it. The brand new company's just started working at. And then we're going to order it and everything will be happy because everything's going to work first time. Maybe not, said the CEO of HS2. Okay, now we're going to plan the question again because we do love a bit of planning practice. This is clearly my start of my hook, and this is my knowledge, which I'm going to start with a good definition and hopefully contextualised, as you can see up there. Then, remember, most hooks are likely value of something to something. So it's likely value of that to that, and we know that this is the rest of the hook. So it needs to be in context with pretty much the rest of that sentence. I'll underline it, maybe colour it in like a geography student. I've then written my definition at the top here, and there's something else I'll talk about in a second, but it's really, really important for us to look at this first. So CPA is a project management tool used to determine the sequence of activities that directly affect the project completion time, very much from the case study. From your textbook. Lifted, memorised, however you want to phrase it. I'll make that look like a K. I'm not going to mark it in the exam, but this is what we would obviously do in class. Then it says, in the context of Buy It Direct, CPA helps plan installation of a new IT system for the warehouse, aiming to ensure the project is completed within 45 weeks. Okay, sounds lovely. However, it doesn't get any marks because it is literally a repeat of the question. You are not going to get application marks for literally repeating the question. All you've done is you've just wasted a minute of your life, more importantly your A-level exam. So I'm going to scribble that out because I don't like that. It's a total waste of time. And more importantly, we haven't got any marks for it. Okay? No application marks for repeating the question. Some application marks repeating the case study. If you interpret, you get oodles and loads of application marks. Now, this type of question, even though it's a 12-mark essay, and it doesn't say using the data, you need to presume that you've got to use the data. I've lifted this from the mark scheme, and it clearly has those quantitative skills that are in the standards. Normally, I would say in class, if it says using the data, and if you don't do a calculation, I'll cap you at level 2, normally in a more deep and scary voice than that. But what we have here is the equivalent of, if you don't use the numbers, then you're going to get capped. Now, I didn't examine this paper. I don't know what the actual interpretation of this is. There's no examples in the examiner report because it was a COVID paper. But if we were doing this like a using the data question this summer, then maybe if you don't do a calculation or you don't interpret the data properly, you're going to get capped at level 2. Now, if you mention the data and interpret it, you might get to level 3. And we've seen that in previous examples in other examiner reports. I think in your mind, you need to do some sort of calculation, which is easy. I've already highlighted 2 in the data extract for you, which I've incorporated into my sort of answer. So we're moving on to our point. Using CPA, Buy It Direct can identify critical activities such as those ones that directly affect the project timeline. It's sort of a repeat of the definition, but we do have a little bit of application. I'm going to put lap next to that, not for little, but limited. Okay, it's sort of there, but I'm starting to use the data. Then we're looking for those extended chains of argument, and because we all love a little bit of cheeky maths, I thought I'd put 2 calculations in one paragraph for you. This allows the company to focus resources. Now, that would make me cross if I read that. Resources, products, customers. So resources, trained staff. Ooh, now that sounds a little bit abstract, but since they trained the staff in activity D, I think it's very much application. On these key tasks to prevent any delays, a bit more knowledge. For instance, I do like phrases like this because it sort of forces me as the student to make sure I'm using the case study. The float time for non-critical activities can be calculated to ensure they do not interfere with the critical path, e.g. B's float time. Here's a calculation, 16 weeks. Quantitative skills, done. Look at that. So they're going to use that to make decisions, and actually we've got graphical and numerical form. Well, this is obviously the graphical form here, and we've interpreted the numbers. And now, because we're showing off, this efficient scheduling can lead to completing the project in 41 weeks. Not very impressive. Until my master math skills come out, 4 weeks ahead. Okay, we would write a nice gap next to that. Good application. And then we thought we'd just chuck in a cheeky quote from the case study. CPA enables Byte Direct to schedule activities with projects simultaneously in the case study, completing the project in 41 weeks, which is 4 weeks ahead of the 45-week target. Now, a couple of lessons with this quote. Number one, examiners are not stupid. So if you put quotation marks around things that aren't actually a quote, they're not going to fall for it. They're not dumb. So only quote stuff that you need. Also, don't quote great big long sentences. You should be interpreting the data, which is where the higher marks are. And also, I've already written this in the previous part of the same paragraph. So again, my laziness of pretending to copy, because I think I'm going to try and game the system, which clearly you can't, is wasted my time. So we'll ignore that. We'll pretend it's not even been written. Okay? Make sure you use the evidence. You don't need to quote an entire case study. However, we do love a however, because it says, hold on tight, Miss Examiner. Here comes my counter-argument. Now, counter-arguments need to be in context. I think it's quite nice to put a quote in there as well if you can. And we'll see. The figures used in the CPA might be inaccurate. Textbook. Then we need the qualitative reason for that. The new ops director is new and may lack experience. Therefore, the project may take longer than the calculated 41 weeks. Not just it will take longer. Well, we know that what the target is, so we may as well write it in. So we've got a bit of application there, we've got a bit of application there, and also we have interpreted this beautiful word, okay? Which isn't actually a quote, is it? It's reworded with a quotation mark around it, but yeah, never mind. So, second point. CPA supports effective cash flow management by scheduling payments that are aligned with project needs. Straight out of the textbook, we know that. Let's contextualise it in a chain of argument. With CPA, Byte Direct can plan financial outflows more effectively by scheduling payments where necessary. Hang on. What's going on here, Dobby? Are you just in repetitive mode? Yeah. In some ways, we've got cash outflows, we've got scheduling of payments, yeah, and we know it's to do with a project. Look at that, I've just got all repetitive again. I only need to say it once. Start with your point, straight into a chain of argument, okay? Payments when necessary. So we've sort of got that. We don't need to say it twice. I know it's good, but it's not that good. For example, suppliers of computers do not have to be paid until week 23. Okay? Allowing the company to manage its cash flow more effectively. This prevents unnecessary expenditure and ensures funds are available when needed. Interpretation of data. Tick for quantitative skill 9. However, unexpected events such as delivery delays from China, that's my loose interpretation of where they've got it from because of the other data extract, I didn't just make it up, could delay the project and disrupt cash flows. Remember, this is about cash flows. This needs to be about cash flows. Potentially leading to financial strain if the project extends beyond the 45-week deadline. It must be completed. There must be a reason behind that. So I'm thinking if they don't, then they're going to have some problems. Okay, that's an interpretation of the 45 weeks because they might lead to financial strain. That's not an assertion and a leap. Yeah, I don't think so anyway. Then I'm leaving another space. You'll notice space between the definitions, space between the points, space. Number one reminds me to structure the answer correctly. I use howevers to make sure that I've got my counter arguments. I use quotation marks, sometimes ineffectively, but to remind me to use the case study evidence properly. And also, if I've accidentally not quite linked to the hook, it's not really a good example here because it's all about IT systems. If the hook was profits or happiness or world peace or something, and the end of my chain of argument doesn't come back to it, at least I've got a space to add it. Okay? Overall, my conclusion is, or whatever you want to use, CPA is valuable. Right, let's stop. Now, this is where, before writing my chain of argument, my conclusion, I would have popped back to the question to double check on that hook, which is why we wrote it on there. So many students get to their conclusions and then they answer a totally different question. Yeah, overall, I think they should use. Yeah, I bet you I would see that if I had some papers from that year. Question's not asking them if they should or shouldn't use it. It's asking them if it's valuable. Yeah? So we go back, we check on the hook, and we do a one-line answer. And even though it might be a bit boring, at least it answers the question. Overall, CPA is valuable for the effective management of the new IT system installation at Buy It Direct. And we'll put a nice cheeky A next to that, which is what we would do in class. We've answered the question. We then need the J for justification. And I think this is where we could consider the alternative. Now, the alternative to using CPA is, not using it. Without CPA, the company might struggle with project delays, ineffective use of resources, leading to potential final issues, and missed deadlines. That's sort of a definite rework of what we've already written, but we just need something else. Especially as their new operation manager is new, mentioned it, but why is it important? And working with a new team, something a little bit extra, which is what the examiners are looking for. Will need clearly communicated with a new team that will need clearly communicated targets and expectations. I'm thinking this is slightly future orientated. I've decided not to write any more for let me write a separate MOPS statement or something like that, which I wouldn't do anyway. But your MOPS is to help you with your justification. Your MOPS needs to be slightly future orientated. And I'm thinking will need, because at the moment our brand new ops director has produced the following plan. Doesn't say they've started it. Okay, so actually that statement of will need clearly communicated targets and expectations is slightly future orientated. Now, as we know, we're not aiming for perfection, we are aiming for level 4. So we need to think about, is this level 4? And yes, I will go through the level 4 standards again. And if you think it's level 1 to 3, then drop me an email or a comment using the standards to tell me why and not just it's rubbish. Yeah. So is it accurate and thorough knowledge and understanding supported throughout, this is a 12 marker, by relevant and effective use of business behaviour in context? Well, it talks about behaviour. It talks about the new arguments without me going through them again. It is contextualised to death. So I think level 4. Now that criteria is very, very important. Now the difference between this criteria and that criteria is the word throughout if you read it. Okay, so if you don't contextualise in one of your paragraphs, you will go to level 3. If you don't contextualise in your conclusion and justification, for that standard you will go to level 3. Context is king. Remember that throughout everything. A coherent and logical chain of reasoning showing cause and or effect. The difference for here is analytical. Now I think the general rule of understanding, even though this is not written in the standards, for a 12 marker is if you're doing 3 and here we're sort of looking at 5. Now this will include your however point, for example, so you can go through that and you can double check that there's 5 in there, but no examiner is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, that's level 4. They just want to know if you've got this nice story, this narrative in context, taking me to that chain of argument. Very important for you to understand. I'm thinking that actually it's pretty good. I'm going to give it a sort of a tick. Is it balanced? Well, argument, however, conclusion, however. I think we're balanced. Is it wide-ranging? And remember that sort of definition we've given you in class, which is more than two. Yeah? And Dobby got that from some examiner training many, many moons ago when he asked, well, what is wide-ranging? More than two arguments. Well, there's one, and there's two, there's three, there's four, and there's sort of maybe five. More than two at least, isn't it? Even if you were being mean and you counted that as one and that as two and that as three, still more than two. It needs to be a more extended argument. Okay, clearly they've mentioned context twice, so make sure you contextualise, kids, and using qualitative and quantitative evidence. Well, look at that beautiful float time and that really bit of tough maths there, saying that we're 4 weeks ahead. It's so easy. Why would you not put it in there? Yeah. Competing arguments. Got your howevers and stuff already, but the supported judgment. The phrase that the examiners introduced a couple of years ago really for their justifications were, is there something a bit more? We're looking for a bit more in our conclusions. Well, the bit more is not just repeating what you've already written. You've already had the marks once, you're not having them again. So a bit more. Well, a bit more was linking it to that little MOPS in the future. That's why Edexcel introduced MOPS a few years ago. It wasn't to introduce a new paragraph to an essay, it was to help you to future orientate your justifications. And if you can do that, you will get that bit more. And if you just repeat the stuff you've already written, you won't get that bit more. Okay? Now, I think that this is level 4. I think, sort of understanding examiner behaviour, they will go level 4, level 4, level 4, let's stick it in the middle, and we think it might be 10. Oops, sorry about that. Maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12. And the frustrating thing is they're both right because of those flexibilities we talk about in class. And if you don't know what I'm talking about because you're not one of mine, go and talk to your teachers and they will explain it to you. But 10 or 12 is doing cartwheels on results day. You should be proud of anything at level 4. If you can get 100% of the marks on those 4 markers, complete the paper on time and get level 4 on all of your essays, you should get yourself at least an A, possibly an A star. I think I'd be happy with that. Hope that was useful, and good luck next week, everyone.